think you're going to find our speaker very enjoyable. Regardless of what Rick thinks, we've always had very unique speakers at this event, and I don't think you're going to be disappointed today whatsoever. I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with Rick Bauerly for roughly the last 10 years in professional and in a variety of volunteer areas. A lot of volunteer areas have come because of Rick, because he's very good about volunteering people. Thanks, Rick. You know, I think Rick's a great example, probably one of the better examples of entrepreneurism, but in a little bit of a different way. He's certainly very successful and all. But what I see in Rick most of all is how he really inspires and breeds success in and for other people. And that's how I would set him apart. Let me give you a little bit of background on Rick for a moment. Rick is one of the founders and serves as managing partner of Grand Equity Partners, which is a private investment company based out of St. Cloud that focuses on investing, governing, and managing private companies throughout the Minnesota region. As a managing partner, Rick focuses on the firm's long-term strategy and organization development efforts, and also serves on several of the portfolio company boards, including Aeration, Zurich, and Atomic Learning. Earlier in his career, Rick worked for Deloitte & Touche as a business analyst. Following his career at Deloitte & Touche, he served as a general manager at Bauerly Companies, and then co-founded Venture Allies, which is a small business consulting firm, along with his sister, Shelley Bauerly-Copel. Rick was formerly a director and finance committee chair at Centricare Health Systems. He is a board member and the volunteer executive director for the Anderson Center and one of 4 incorporators of the Greater St. Cloud Development Corporation. Rick is a leader in giving for the United Way and a past president of St. John's National Alumni Association. Graduating with honors at St. John's with degrees in economics and management, Rick went on to earn a master's in business administration from the Harvard Business School and a master's in public administration from the Harvard Kennedy School. Now, I know Rick's very humble, so I'm going to tell you a few other things. First of all, what he's not humble about is I'd like to introduce his family. Helga, Emily, and Olivia are sitting at the table. Please welcome them. I don't think he's very humble either about the team that helps him be successful, and that's the team at Granite Equity. And they are seated here as well. Art Monahan, Pat Edinburgh, Greg Schumacher, Shelley Bauerly-Copel. I want to talk a little bit about Granite Equity, but I'm going to move away from the script a little bit because what I wrote doesn't make sense, and I see Father Don sitting here that if I would read this, he'd be terribly disappointed. But Granite Equity started a number of years ago, probably within the last 10 years. And it really started on a dream of local business owners in St. Cloud, Minnesota, that started seeing a lot of private businesses all of a sudden start selling out to larger companies that weren't in the area. And all of a sudden it started taking jobs and dollars out of the local community, and they could see the impact that that was having. So there was a dream in the community. I remember this. And this was really before I even knew Rick. There was a dream that we said we need to provide opportunities to businesses for our community to keep the jobs here, keep the businesses here, and keep the dollars here. And it was a dream, and it seemed like a pretty significant dream. But no one could figure out, well, how are we going to do this? Well, then came along Rick Bauerly, and I don't know how he became aware of this situation, possibly because of his family being in business, but he took this on. And Rick and the associates at Granite Equity made it happen. Currently, Granite Equity is a $100 million+ investment company that owns a number of small private businesses throughout the Minnesota region. And truly in St. Cloud, we are looked at as providing a great deal of resources and solutions for businesses that don't want to see their employees get terminated or businesses move out of the community. And it's been a tremendous success. In the midst of creating this private equity company, Rick also volunteered as the executive director for the Anderson Center, which is an organization that provides business management and leadership training. But he took it on as a volunteer because it was a bit of a struggling organization. And now I can say they're very successful providing that type of training to small businesses throughout Minnesota. And he continues as the volunteer executive director. Rick also recently initiated a new economic development organization in St. Cloud in order to retain and recruit businesses to St. Cloud. One of the things that's really interesting about Rick that I've noticed, and I'd have to say I've included in this, is that he has a lot of great ideas, and when he starts talking about the ideas and what needs to get accomplished, he does a very good job. People just really buy into it and really want to be part of a successful organization. He's demonstrated that time and time again. These are just a few examples of Rick's accomplishments. Although I've only known Rick a few years, he has truly demonstrated an entrepreneurial spirit and in fact has been instrumental in inspiring the spirit in many people within our community. We're very fortunate to have Rick in our St. Cloud community as well as in the St. John's and St. Ben's alumni community. Please welcome Rick Bauerly.
Wow, well, thank you to Mark. He's a great friend, but that was too much. Good afternoon to all of you as friends. It's our shared affection for St. John's and St. Ben's and our common interest in entrepreneurial leadership that brings us together for these luncheons. They give all of us a chance to get off the treadmill and try to get up to the balcony to look at our work. As I share a bit of my entrepreneurial experiences today, it's my hope that the role that St. John's and St. Ben's have played in your life, that you'll feel that afresh today as you think about your own work. Before sharing a few experiences, though, I'd like just to add a little bit to Mark's introduction to my family. And that is that over some 14 years now, I've asked Helga first, can we invest a third of our savings in Granite Equity? And she came to say yes. And then a few years later, I asked, could we invest 2/3 of our savings in Granite Equity? And it was a little slower answer, and she talked about diversification and things like this. And she said yes. And then a few years later, I asked for that final third. And then the home equity. She's all in with Granite Equity, and I appreciate that. She's here doing due diligence on us today to make sure that everything we're doing is going okay. My daughter Emily is here today, and I think for two reasons. One, as soon as I get done talking, which can't be soon enough, we're going to go to the Mall America, and we're going to find a prom dress. The one she doesn't know about is that there's all kinds of osmosis going on. She's a junior in high school, and if you can help me with this osmosis after the event and whisper about St. Ben's, I'd appreciate it. And Olivia is here. She gave me her good luck charm today to help her dad. And she's trying to figure out what it is I'm always thinking about. My business partners are here, Art, Pat, and now our incoming partners, Greg and Shelley. And we have navigated a very tough decade over the last decade. If you could pick any decade you didn't want to start a business in, you'd probably think about the 1920s, and then you'd probably think about the last decade. We've navigated that together. We share the toil of building a business, and we share really the excitement of being on a winning team. And we also share contentment of knowing that we're doing good work. There's two stories I'd like to tell you today and then try to draw out a few lessons from them. The first is a bit more on the story of Granite Equity. Mark shared our mission to invest in and then govern and grow some of the great companies in greater Minnesota, when their owners are retiring. In some ways, for me, this story began on the 4th floor of the main building. You remember it at St. Ben's in the Organizational Leadership Program. OLP, as we called it, was a year-long experience for about 60 of us in leading and managing a simulated company, actually 4 simulated companies. It was an exercise in working as a team toward organizational goals. To be sure, we studied a lot of management theory and management tools across that year, but 20 years later, it's not the theory or the tools that I remember or that I think influenced me. What I remember is the process of becoming a team, and the forming, which was exciting, and then the storming, which always happens for us when we're forming teams, and then the search for norms and norming so that we can, in time, really perform as a team. I remember it being iterative, defining and redefining goals, designing and redesigning roles, and discovering and trying to engage each of our unique strengths. So I remember the hard, soft stuff from OLP. Granite Equity, and building it over the last decade, has been a similar process for us of team building and organizational development. This time, though, in a real company with high stakes. In Granite Equity, we have a series of roles and stakeholders in our company: investors and lenders who provide equity and debt capital, business owners who choose us as investment and governance partners, and then seasoned directors and executives who supplement the portfolio company's boards and management teams as the leaders are retiring from them. Now, if you think about these 3 groups, investors as a group, business owners as a group, and then seasoned executives and directors as a group, and you rate each of them on how strong their wills are. They're all really strong-willed, really successful, and expert people. And it's our hope that we help build a team to help owners retire. And that's a difficult succession planning process. And so following each investment we make and in each company we work with, there's this process of bringing existing team members together along with new team members, some investors, some directors, and some executives. And beyond the fact that we have capital to invest and purchase stock from business owners, I think business owners are coming to see us as increasing in our effectiveness in helping the next generation of owners and directors and executives lead that company forward. The OLP, for me, has had a significant influence on this work. It was an important seed for Granite Equity. Barbara Edwards Farley is here today. She and the late Jack Farley helped design and build this program, and I was one of the CEOs in these 4 simulated companies. And I'm really grateful. They were professors in title, but I really remember them as coaches for me in this practice and in this simulation that we did. And in preparing for today, I dug out from the file a letter that they wrote to the Harvard Business School. I'm sure it wasn't about me, but it was a really good letter. The second story I'd like to share is about that Greater St. Cloud Development Corporation that Mark mentioned. A couple years now of energy going into this nonprofit economic development organization to strengthen the regional economy around St. Cloud. This story, too, for me, draws from St. John's. Many of you know Joe Friedrich, who's now retired as an economics professor. I took his class, Public Sector Economics, and we debated the performance of markets. Are markets efficient or are they inefficient? Do they ever fail? Is there any better alternative than market-based capitalism? Tough questions and seemed kind of abstract at the time. Later, I had Dan Finn's course, which I think today still has this intriguing title, Economic Thought and Religious Values. In this class, we read and debated the long tradition of Catholic social teaching about economic questions. And I remember being surprised by the degree to which Catholic social teaching weighs in on economic questions, including the questions we debated in Joe Friedrich's Public Sector Economics course. The teaching in these papal encyclicals and in these writings of the National Conference of Bishops are really pretty clear, and they've been helpful to me. I'm going to paraphrase them very roughly and on 2 points. The first is that in Catholic social teaching, it's clear that markets are not perfect. But there's another thing that's clear in Catholic social teaching, and that is that while they are imperfect, they are thought to be the best available form for us to organize our economy, the best alternative amongst imperfect options. Fast forwarding, what does this have to do with the Greater St. Cloud Development Corporation? Well, if we were all perfectly convinced that markets are perfect, that they're efficient, that they're effective, and that they're complete, we wouldn't spend any time and we wouldn't spend any money as individuals or as corporations in trying to supplement markets. In fact, we do spend a lot of time and we spend a lot of money trying to make up for market imperfections. And we typically think about governments as the way to supplement. But if you think about our individual work, if you think about families helping families, if you think about churches mobilizing for community efforts, or if you think about corporations coming together with their CEOs to take collective action, those are often responses to some inefficiency or some inequity that we don't like. In the case of the Development Corporation, 65 companies, healthcare and education institutions, and cities and counties in central Minnesota have mobilized to act on 6 initiatives. The corporation is asking questions and addressing questions like this. If 30,000 college students in and around St. Cloud had better information about jobs available, would a larger share stay in central Minnesota, and would more of them be gainfully employed today? If corporations had better information about the return on investment that comes from wellness and disease prevention programs that they can influence inside of their own walls, would they invest more in these programs to improve employee health and to reduce healthcare costs at the same time? These questions are thinking about imperfections in market information. And where there are imperfections in the market, Catholic social teaching calls on us to try to find solutions to improve the dignity of humans. I appreciate that Joe Friedrich and Dan Finn challenged us with these abstract questions back then, but I think if we struggle with them, they have tangible application for us today. From these two stories, I'd like to abstract up a little on the topic of this series, entrepreneurial leadership. And briefly, what do we mean by entrepreneurship? And what do we mean by leadership? On entrepreneurship, I like Howard Stevenson's definition as this, quote, "the relentless pursuit of opportunity beyond the resources currently controlled." In the case of Granite Equity, my partners and I think we have been somewhat relentless over the last decade in pursuing a particular opportunity that we're focused on. And we've moved from a business plan and zero resources 10 years ago to now we influence or control over $100 million in equity capital that fuels our collective ownership in 11 operating companies that engage close to 2,000 people in our collective mission. However, there's a big problem that we face, or at least there's a significant chance of a big problem for us as Granite Equity. And that is that resources can demobilize a lot faster than it takes to mobilize them. We all remember companies of the past, like Lehman Brothers and others. And so if mobilizing resources towards an opportunity is the work of entrepreneurs and the stuff of entrepreneurship, isn't sustaining those resources and retaining talent in people the work of leaders and the stuff of leadership? For us, Bennies and Johnnies, I think Benedict has a lot to say about this work of leaders. In his rule, he asks us some deeply challenging questions, and I think they speak directly to how well a community or an organization can sustain its resources or retain people towards its mission. You remember these. Here's 5 of them. Do we listen keenly with the ear of our heart? Do we take counsel, calling the whole community together when anything important is to be done? Do we respect all persons, pursuing what is better for someone else and not what is judged best for ourselves? Do we practice stewardship, regarding all utensils as if they were the sacred vessels of the altar? Do we live simply and frugally with all things done in moderation? Through commitment to these values, the Benedictines has sustained itself for 1,500 years globally and 150 years here locally. Most organizations or communities in human history do not live up to these ideals, and most of them die in a few years or a few decades. My partners and I intend for Granite Equity to live 100 years. And I think if we do well at these Benedictine values, Granite Equity has a lot higher likelihood of making it to 100 years. And if we don't, we'll be another one of those companies that also ran. For the sustainability of Granite Equity and many of our organizations and communities, we appreciate this high challenge and the daunting standards that the Benedictines have set. In closing, I'd just like to say thank you to all of those who are working on the McNeely Center, to Mark and to Terry, to Paul, if he's here, and to Mike and Bob, who have been champions for many years. It's really a great thing, and we're very fortunate that the university was able to attract Terry 8 years ago. Let's make it last 100 years. And I also want to say thanks to the Private Investment Fund. There's a group of Johnnies who started it 10 years ago, and they've done the heavy lifting. They got it off the ground from 0 resources to 500,000 in resources. And that's a lot heavier lifting than going from 500,000 to X in the next 10 years. So many Johnnies own private stock, Benny's own private stock. It's a tool that can be gifted to St. John's, and when cashed, it can be invested in high growth enterprises that can and will outperform the average university endowment allocation. So it's a clever strategy that has done phenomenally for Stanford, and we should start to imagine what it might be in 100 years. Finally, to St. Ben's and to St. John's, we say thanks for delivering, this always happens, inspired learning and for inspiring our lives. Thanks. Was anything interesting enough to ask a question about? Terry.
Can you talk a little bit more about what it takes to find a company in Minnesota for you to invest in?
Yeah. So, I think it's a generic marketing question and a specific one. Our brand needs to be known to an owner, and it's typically known through their accountant, their attorney, their banker, or a friend. We also have the good benefit of having 200 investors across the state. And so if they each know 5 people, and business owners and business executives tend to know business owners and business executives, so that we hope when a business owner is thinking about retiring, that either through their advisors or through our investor network or our company network, that we'll hear about that. And then it's one of the most sensitive questions in the world when you're thinking about selling your business. And so we hope that we can have a brand that's trusted to have a confidential conversation about whether we might be a good partner for them. Kristen.
I've had a glimpse into how strenuous the life of an entrepreneur can be. Can you share some of your learnings in the balance you found with staying on and the success you have in business?
Yeah. Haven't found it, Kristen. If you look at the circumference of my waist, that's the answer. Yes, it has. 42 inches. I don't know if I'm getting better at it. Art and Pat and Shelley and I, we need to get better at it because we've run at a pace for the last 10 years that's not sustainable. And we now have resources that we can start adding to our team, so that will help. We have been lean and frugal to a fault, to be Benedictine in that way, and to survive a tough economy. But I think the next 10 years we have to focus on balance more. All of the inspiration and the thinking about it can come from St. John's and St. Ben's. It's just implementing it every day that's hard. So. Yes?
How are you going to look forward into the future? How are you going to do that day to day and keep that balance? One of the things that Granite Equity does is build a team to help the owners of your portfolio of companies retire. How's that going to play into Granite Equity then as well and ensure that it maintains its identity going forward?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think we do have to lead by example, the 5 of us. We have to become more healthy ourselves, more sustainable in our own team. We do spend a lot of time with the companies, focusing on their sustainability and their teams. But I think looking in the mirror, of course, is the hard stuff of leadership. We've got to get our mirror out.
Does that mean your wellness plan starts
Yes, I actually see, the intellectual side of me says, let's start a wellness plan. We do have the Granite Man Triathlon coming up. We've been doing that for 3 years, but you know, it's 3 months of health for us, and then off the bandwagon.
Does the Granite Equity have an exit strategy or timeline going into an acquisition?
Well, I think that's one of the ways that we're different than the private equity industry, is that we intend to invest and hold companies for the long term. We're more like a family business in that respect. And so I think one of the beauties of private equity is in a buy and sell model, there's a real discipline and a real urgency about improving the company and its cash flow and its position. So the real advantage of our model is that many owners in greater Minnesota prefer it. They want to find a home for their business, for their legacy, that's a permanent home. So we think we have a market advantage in that respect, but we have to have the discipline as board members to bring the same level of urgency to improvement that, that private equity brings.
Can you talk briefly about the process you use in starting Granite Equity? When you kind of had one or two clients, potential clients that you get started, or you have a business first?
Yeah, I think the energy for Granite Equity was the energy that Mark talked about. There were 6 family businesses who watched other family businesses kind of metaphorically sell to New York, and they didn't like it. And they were each willing to write $1 million check into this pooled investment to try to present a local alternative for owning companies that are in transition. So those 6 were ready to write a check, and an attorney that worked for a lot of them, Lee Hansen, asked me, will you try to put a team together to capture this energy? So the energy existed, and we were 30 or 32, and we were foolish enough to say yes. And you know, in finance, at St. John's and St. Ben's, you hear about OPM, other people's money. And it sounds really attractive at the time. But it is the source of sleepless nights. And you know, you put your own money in, but if you take money from other people, you know, that stewardship has to be real. You have to create value with that money, or you won't continue to attract it. So I think that was the beginning. There was energy amongst business people, young, and some young people who were willing to try to manage it. Terry?
You haven't talked enough about Anderson Center. Can you talk about how this fits into the puzzle?
Yeah. Well, if you go to business school and you take the first year curriculum and you try to boil it down into a few lessons, you remember from finance that the professor will ask, why do businesses fail? And the answer for the finance professor is because they run out of cash. And that's correct technically. You know, it's a good technical answer. But then you go to marketing, and the marketing professor asks the same question, and the marketers in us say because customers don't demand or value the products or services of the business anymore. And that's a good answer too, and we're kind of moving more towards the root. And then you go to organizational behavior, and we ask ourselves, why is this business not able to attract talent? Maybe it's the lack of attracting and retaining talent that led to the death of the business and the products and services getting out of sync with the market that led to running out of cash. And then you go to leadership course, and there's a bit different question and answer. Why do businesses fail? And one of the answers is the success syndrome, that leaders fall prey to the success syndrome. And that is a very simple syndrome where we believe that because we were successful yesterday, that therefore we will be successful tomorrow. Or that because we were successful in this environment, that therefore we'll be successful in that environment. And I think that's the root of it, and that running out of cash is kind of the symptom of it. And in central and greater Minnesota, 10 years ago, there really wasn't a market, a product, a service for leadership development, for management development. We in greater Minnesota love coming to the cities for certain things, and we don't want to come to the cities for other things. And I would say that essentially central and greater Minnesota business owners don't invest in leadership and management development, and that's the enemy. And that investing in leadership and management development, it has the potential to reduce the chances of the success syndrome if we look at ourselves and try to develop ourselves, not just the CEO, who often says, it's not for me, it's for my direct reports, but for all of us. I think learning is really the only source of competitive advantage in the world. It's the root source, and so some of these same business owners have invested in developing the Anderson Center as a nonprofit organization to provide what the Carlson Schools Exec Ed provides for the Twin Cities, and to provide it in greater Minnesota so that business owners and execs will show up.
Real quick, just a couple of things. How do a Domer and a Johnny come together? And talk a little bit about your team and how you guys all came together as an entrepreneur.
Well, speaking of humility, we at St. John's know that we're just the small Notre Dame. We're happy with that. So we came together naturally. I think Greg actually knew Art and introduced him to Pat and I, as it were. And I think we share common values, Notre Dame and St. John's values. Pat and I met at Deloitte in 1991, and here in the consulting practice. He went to Harvard Business School. I followed him there, and we stayed in touch thereafter. And he was itching after 10 years at Medtronic, corporate ladder, and I was itching as well. I had spent some time at Bauerly Brothers, and we came together. Shelley was with us at the beginning, helping to write the business plan through Venture Allies and the consulting firm. So, and Greg helped us find Art, and then really has placed 20 executives and directors in our companies over the last 10 years. And in executive search, finding the cultural fit is about a 50-50 proposition. So say the studies. And Greg has been 19 for 20 for Granite Equity. And I think that's an incredible source of advantage to be able to attract great board members, CEOs, and managers as owners are retiring. So.
Currently looking for opportunities, or is your place full?
Our bank account is empty. And so, typically we raise capital every so often. We're in a capital raise right now, and we're reloading. So June 1st, we should have another $40 million to invest in 10 more companies. And we'll do that over the next 10 years, adding to our existing portfolio. So we're going to be back heavy looking for investments June 1. Thank you very much.